Okay, everybody, look at all this energy talking about metadata.
Closer the better.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for all of the energy. Please, let's get ready for the next panel.
Thanks for joining us.
So the panels that we have today around metadata are really taking us in a trajectory from the early days. And listening to the first panel this morning, it became really apparent to me that they were really talking about some of the foundational problems and the lack of any kind of infrastructure when digital first started. And listening to the ladies of metadata, it struck me that there were really three main problems. One was that the entire supply chain in the old days was of course set up around physical and bricks and mortar, and that you're manufacturing CDs and you're selling them in a corner shop in Mississippi or Los Angeles or Paris. And that the evolution from physical to digital was something that no one was prepared for, not from a business standpoint, not from an artistic standpoint, not from a data standpoint. And I would say that these were probably in the order of priorities. The other thing that was a major change in that transition is the volume of releases. And no one really talked about that on the panel this morning, but in the days when we had physical releases, there were about 100,000 albums that were released in a year. And now, on a daily basis, there are 25,000 songs being uploaded to all of the music services. So we not only had the lack of infrastructure in the early days, where people were making things up as they go and trying to make things work for their company, which is, that worked in the physical age, not in digital. And then we have this explosion of the number of releases and the unbundling of the album. So it went from 100,000 albums to now 25,000 songs per day. The other thing that was really great on this last panel was the diversity of uses for metadata. In the early days of digital, one of the things that all of us who were working in it, we had to illustrate that metadata is the only way that everyone's going to get paid and that things are going to be accounted for properly. But it was also the era where people would search and people were using downloads. And so you'd have Jay-Z, the letters Jay-Z, J-Z, J-A-Y-Z-E-E, J-A-Y-Z, uppercase, lowercase, all sorts of different characters. And the way search worked in those days is that you almost always had to have an exact match in order to get what you wanted. And the interesting thing from this morning was also what it took to get all of the people inside labels and the industry to really pay attention. And this industry is driven by artists and about breaking artists and about music. And it was really about how can we ensure that the fans can find the music that they want. So that was the early days. And now we have a really exciting panel to talk about some of the things that are happening now. And without further ado, I'll turn this over to you, and you can go ahead and introduce your panelists, Joshua.
Great. Thank you, Vicky. That sets us up nicely. So, as Vicky said, there's the scale of music being released is growing exponentially. And that obviously means the scale of metadata is also increasing exponentially. So I'm joined today by some very smart folks who are all working to handle this scale of metadata, and everyone is addressing metadata from various different aspects for various different use cases. I think everyone is doing something very innovative, so I think we'll take 10 minutes for intros so that everyone can explain who they are, what they do, and how they're working to fix and offer solutions to this ever-growing issue of metadata. So I'll let Todd go first.
Great. Thank you. Hi, my name is Todd Tate. I'm a co-founder of Viva Data. We're out of Oakland, California. I'm a longtime musician. You can find me online under the stage name Sayla Dobro, S-A-Y-L-A. I work with a well-known music metadata expert named Lucas Gons, who's a former VP of Content Ops at Gracenote. We're two guys and a gaggle of contractors, bootstrapped, funded by revenues. Our company was founded on the basis that humans simply cannot find all the errors in music metadata at scale. So what we do is we flag errors in music metadata against the Apple Style Guide and any other style guide that a potential customer would wish to do. And we also build proprietary tools for internal use to the client's specification. Our tools have been in use at the Orchard for the last 8 months, and we're looking forward to serving more in the industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I'm Doug Mitchell from Exactuals. We're a payments company. We do complex payments like royalties for music space, also in film and TV for residuals. We have a payments platform, an online portal. We give transparency and analytics around those payments to payers and payees. We also have a metadata cleaning and parsing technology, which does entity resolution, helps clean disparate data sets. So that's pretty much us.
Hi, my name is Deborah Fairchild. I'm the president of Viva Sound, and we handle all of the content that comes out of the studio, and our clients are record labels and content owners. So we do, with the metadata side, all of the DDEX REN files. So that's something that our company's been really instrumental in helping define and create throughout the industry, which it was just published in Berlin in 2016, so that's been a really exciting time for us. We have a free plugin that creators can use to gather content in the studio and then export a DDEX REN file. There's some other things we do behind the scenes in terms of the verification of the audio, but I guess for this panel, we're sticking with metadata, so that's what we do.
Hi, I'm Terry Bustino. I'm from DataClef. DataClef is a wholly owned subsidiary of SOCAN, the Canadian PRO. I've been working with SOCAN and now with DataClef for almost 30 years. One of the things that I've done on the IT side is I developed our legacy application on the SOCAN side, which we've recently retired, and we've moved into a completely new ERP-based system. It's all completely agreements-based, multi-territory, multi-rights, point in time. SOCAN had to do that. We were at a point we just couldn't keep up anymore, similar to most PROs and other CMOs. And as part of what I was doing at SOCAN, I've done a lot of work as a subcontractor to Fast Track. Fast Track is the software supplier to CSAC. So we've been heavily involved in understanding the different applications and tools that have been built for CSAC through Fast Track. So we have a very good understanding of how to interact with all the different societies around the world, which has led my development team to have a very good understanding of really how things work. We all do the same thing, but we all do it differently. So being able to interact with the different societies around the world has been just instrumental for us, really helped us to understand how to build our new system, and that's how we spun off last year DataClef as a service organization, leveraging the build we had to do for SOCAN.
Cool, and I am, thanks guys, I'm Josh Jackson from Jackster. Didn't name the company, but it rolls off the tongue nicely. Jackster is working to bring credits back to the forefront of the digital music experience. We collect metadata from industry sources, labels, publishers, distributors, and others. We've been building a comprehensive database of official credits through those partnerships. And we're focused on making sure those credits are accessible in the absence of liner notes and sleeve notes that used to come with physical product, and making sure there's a place for fans and professionals to access that information through a consumer-facing website, and then looking at ways we can power third-party platforms with this depth of mapped, accurate metadata. And if you need any more information, we have a lounge outside. You might have seen it. So first question on the agenda, how has music metadata changed in the last 2 years? I think the fact that all of us are working working primarily focused on metadata shows that there is a lot to be done. We're all relatively new companies, or maybe have introduced new products into existing companies. So it's definitely a lot of innovation and development that's happened, not just in the last 2 years, but in the past longer, 5, 10 years. And a lot of people up here have been working at this for decades. So, but how has music metadata changed in the last 2 years? There's a couple of initiatives listed in the agenda, which each play an integral role to the development of standards and ways of dealing with metadata that can be used across the industry supply chain. DDEX, Digital Data Exchange, they work to develop standards that can be applied at various aspects of the supply chain, be that how a distributor delivers content to a DSP, how studio metadata can be collected and structured and then delivered downstream towards the labels, which can then be fed into DSPs or used in other applications, and ways that DSPs can more efficiently report to their rights holders around usage. So DDEX, very diverse initiative in addressing much needed standards that can be used by everyone. Then there's also the OMI, Open Music Initiative, which came out of Berklee College of Music. They're working towards providing open source software and APIs to help identify the owner of rights holders. It's a pretty innovative initiative. ISNI is also mentioned, the International Standard Name Identifier. This is an identifier that can be given to a public entity, whether they work across multiple mediums, be that in film, television, music, books. So you can identify all of their projects to a single individual. And that's the uptake on ISNI over the past couple of years has been pretty impressive, and I think it will continue to be adopted as we go forward. And play a pretty integral role in how individuals are identified. So some questions to the panel. DDEX, quickly, who is using DDEX standards, any or various, in their existing day-to-day operations, and how are you using them, and how have they helped the business?
Everyone's looking at me.
Yeah, sorry, that was...
Thank you, that's a
Deborah.
huge compliment. Yes, so our company, we handle the REN data, so that's the studio metadata, and we are really involved in the verification of the data coming out of the studio for our clients. So the sad part of it is if the mix engineer didn't use a part, but the label did pay a player, credits get removed, but more often than not, people get added into the credits. So if we have the session open, the Pro Tools Logic, all of the performers and credits are in there. We're able to A/B that with the label copy from our clients, and cross-check that, and if there is anyone missing off of that, they're properly credited back. So the RIN, that's something that our company has been really involved in. In 2008, we did a project with UMG and Sony and Warner, a bunch of different companies, to codify the standard for the Library of Congress, since they knew that eventually it would become public domain and they needed a standard field set. And so that was adopted into DDEX, which became the underlying schema for the RIN. And now that it's been released, it was released in Berlin in 2016, and it just was adopted. The 1.1 was just released. Actually, I see Mark back there. He should probably be the one talking about it. Mark Asherwood has put a lot of time and effort into it. But it's really cool. Kim was up here earlier, and different people, like she said, it's like a lot of people have been involved in this for a really long time. And I feel the cool thing about standards and identifiers and kind of things that aren't as cool, I guess would be the word to talk about. The people have really put a lot of effort into standardizing it and keeping it creative and keeping things working in the back end so, the magic of music can happen.
Yeah, it's really about making sure everyone can be as efficient as possible. No one's...
Yeah, and a lot of effort a lot of companies are involved now, and I feel like DDEX is a really cool way that that's been able to actually happen in a realistic way instead of just in theory.
Yeah, we deal with a lot of release metadata, and so we see the ERN DDEX message coming in, and we can spit that back out. So it really helps to be speaking the same language digitally.
When DDEX comes up in our conversations, our mission is to flag errors at scale. So it's simply another piece of data. So we can check the data on the way out per the client specification and check the data on the way back in. So the DDEX comes up in probably 50% of our conversations, pretty much because people know what we do. Yeah.
And does anyone have any other technologies?
I was going to.
Oh, sorry. Jump in.
We use the DSRs quite a bit, and we're following, obviously, the developments on I think it's called correct me if I got this wrong, Mark, but I think the works registration. We're now preparing to start doing that because what DDEX has done, it's become, in our minds, very stable now. It's reliable. We know what to expect. It's getting adopted more, and when you're having to ingest data in very many different formats, the easier it is, the least that we have to do, because these are very costly systems to build, these interfaces. The exchanges, the more ability I have to do it in the least number of ways is more efficient for me, and that's one of our biggest concerns, and that's why we appreciate what DDEX is doing.
So you're talking about the musical works notification?
Yes,
MWN?
thank you.
Yes, that's exchanging publishing information, requesting and transmitting and publishing information.
And beyond DDEX and some of the other standards and initiatives that we mentioned, other technologies that anyone's adopted in the past couple of years to support their metadata operations? Anyone using blockchain? No, we'll save that for another panel. I'm sure there's a blockchain panel somewhere.
One thing I wanted to kind of add to the DDEX conversation was just as a business development talent in the industry in the past, have been offered some really good content deals via a DSR. So people that aren't implementing DDEX are simply, they're not going to get these deals. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Get with it.
So there's so many use cases for metadata within the supply chain. I mean, smart speakers being an obvious use case for accurate metadata and efficient royalty payments, which Doug's company deals with, licensing inefficiencies. It plays a role across the entire spectrum of applications. So some questions: how has metadata improved, and how has the approach to using metadata improved, and what can we do to make it better? I think we had a conversation beforehand about trust. The trust of metadata that's being entered, and passed through the supply chain. Where does that? How do we foster that trust and ensure that everyone is receiving accurate and usable metadata? So,
one of the areas that really concerns us as a PRO and having to make payments is I have to be right. I cannot be wrong. The most costly process to me is if there's a mistake in a payment. It just cascades all over the place. What the standards allow us to do is accept data in very specific formats. We know what data we're receiving, but where we're having trouble as an industry is trusting that data. And I don't mean it in a negative way, but how do I know that data is absolutely right? I don't. And that where you start moving into the blockchain concept around smart contracts, probably 95% of the time they're going to get it right. But I'm in a business where I can't be wrong. I have to deal direct from source with the data. It's the only thing that I can rely on because I have labels, I have publishers, I have the creators all coming at me going, where'd you get this information? I didn't give it to you. I have to have that data from this source. And that's what the standards allow us to do. That allows us to exchange that information in ways that we can rely on that information.
yeah, and where can you give anyone share some examples of where their clients are putting pressure on them to deliver more accurate metadata, or is this where is the drive for all these standards? Who's pushing the demand for this? Is it the DSPs? Is it what they're requesting? Is it the consumers? Is it them because they want the access to the information? Rights holders, creators? Who's really pushing this?
Well, to kind of go back a little to answer your previous question and parlay into this, I think one method that is going on right now to trust the data per se is with Apple enforcing their style guide. So that is we consider that for our operations, it's a data oracle, So other people have internal style guides that they maybe kind of enforce, So that's one effort moving forward by the DSPs is style guides.
Yeah, and Josh, I think all those things are hitting critical mass. All those same people that you mentioned, the creators, DSPs, everyone, people trying to pay royalties, everyone's coming up against the same problems. The attribution's not there. From a royalty standpoint, you have to know who to pay to be able to pay them. You have to know more information than that. And so I think it's just all this stuff was done by hand for so many years, and at small scale you can do that, but billions of transactions, it just can't be done. I mean, you have to have standards. You can't have 180 different file types that you're receiving in any given period. It needs to be standardized. So I think it's coming from all sides.
Yeah. And leading on from that, like the cooperation between companies and their approach to sharing metadata and making more of their information available that you can leverage in your operations, whether that's through APIs or other software. Are you leveraging a lot of third-party sources for accurate metadata?
I mean, they're out there, you almost have to just go with consensus and take all the sources and use some intelligence to try to figure out, the consensus says, 9 out of 10 sources say it's this way, and that's got to be right.
Actually, I'll take a little exception to that. I really can't do that. I'm under contract when I receive information, when I give information, and that's the world that I have to live in. I understand where you're coming from, but that's where I am. And some of my contracts, I get usage sent to me that's based on contracts that were written in the 90s. I'm stuck, unless I go back as a PRO with all the different people that I have to deal with, even across societies, to make international payments to the other societies. We're in contract limbo, really, where we're stuck, And that aspect of how can I use that data, what can I do, what can I give to my customer, that's my problem. We've gotten past the tech problems where we were talking big data years ago, 10, 15 years ago. We have technology now that deals with it. That's no longer our issue. We have standards that let us talk to each other. But now what can I share? What can I use and for what purpose? That's my bigger problem right now. And no, I don't have an answer. I've just watched it happen.
Yeah. So in essence, you're saying that a legacy contract kind of restricts your activities.
A lot of it, yes.
Yeah.
But I will just touch on a little bit. I do think it's a really cool time in the industry as well, because a lot of these, major record labels and companies have full divisions of really smart people. I see a lot of you sitting right there. Oh, working on this stuff and also educating creators and producers, which is kind of our niche in it, of just letting the creative people know, like high-res audio, and along with that, metadata requirements and kind of why it's important. And so I think a lot of the content owners who are paying to have this music recorded are doing a really good job at the outreach of that. So just to mention that. It's not all just, third parties. I think it's the direct. I've seen a lot of people who are actually really promoting the greater good, which helps everybody.
Yeah, and the education around why metadata is important has really it's been prolific.
Talking to a producer about doing this in a session, that's a whole nother fun time.
Going back to the RIN, and I know there are other tools that don't necessarily leverage the RIN, but providing creators the tools to collect as much data in the studio as close to the point of creation as possible. Now, I imagine in the long term, that's only going to make all our jobs a lot easier when we're getting this almost from the source as early as possible. So it's great to see Viva Sound have a tool and others making those available. The digital audio workstations are working to make this part of the production process. So it's great to see all these tools becoming available in the education, the Grammys, Peony Wing, driving a conversation around that directly with songwriters and producers and telling them exactly, and educating them on exactly why it's important to ensure that what you're putting into the system, what you're sending to your label, why that's so integral to your livelihood. It not just helps get you paid, which is obviously a very important part of it, but make sure you get that attribution, which is what Jaxter's focused on, making sure we take that information and make it available. But that can be how someone gets their next gig. That's how they get discovered, because of their credit. I mean, Zane Lowe said it yesterday that when he got his first credit, it was one of the most important moments of his life. Yes, it's great to see all the education and innovation around making sure good metadata goes into the system.
Well, and encoding that is not fun work, right? So you have to have the tools. It has to be super easy. When you're on the session, you're just going, okay, let's fill it out. Something's got to be popping up on the screen for the engineers and the creatives. It just forces them, it's just easier to do it now.
Making it as easy as possible without affecting the creative process. And then that leads us on to the next point of conversation: what needs more work in the absence? Well, let's just for a second. In the absence of quality metadata going in, what can be done to clean? I know a couple of companies. Todd, your company is involved in supporting the cleanup. Not you don't do the cleaning. You made that clear, but if you tell us a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, within that, kind of, again, I'd like to back up a bit. We haven't seen much change within the last 2 years. So, what was the question again?
In the absence of quality metadata what can be done to support the the completion of that metadata and ensuring that's clean and sufficient when you can't necessarily go back to the source and address those gaps. What can be done to improve it?
It's messy. I mean, the use case you give there, I mean, you need like ourselves, with us, we would use the style guide to be the source of truth. So we would simply format the data to that. If there's missing writers and such like that, that wouldn't be our bag. We would refer that to another company to take care of that. We do get some calls where people simply they've purchased a catalog and they just want to give us titles and then they want a database. And so, it's very manual work, as we were discussing in the green room with some of your experience with UMG and a team of 50 people. It's very manual. I mean, we'd be happy to do it for folks, but yeah. I mean, the use case you present, that's the state of the industry, really, for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, if it's been out in the marketplace, then that data is somewhere, So
Just gotta look for it.
yeah, you got to look for it. If it's been written, hopefully it's been registered with a PRO. That data is somewhere. So it's about being able to get a lot of data sources and combining them all and matching them together, and that's what we do.
And in that matching process, I mean, how important are existing industry identifiers playing a role in your operations? I mean, how important is it that those identifiers are allocated and accurate to help with the data processing?
Oh, they're key. I mean, matching on a alphanumeric or some sort of code is, a direct match. It's easy. Once those codes are missing, it gets very difficult to do. Like we were talking about earlier, like the old school, name matches, title matches. It's hard work. It can be done, but how many hours do you have in the day? So the better the identifiers are, the more that are present, the easier the job is.
So where do we see the where do we see the improvements coming? What more needs to be done? How can the industry continue to beyond education on the input side? What more needs to be done? What are the interesting technologies in the space that are being? Does anyone have any examples of anything that they feel needs more work?
There's always more work to do, but where I see things that are very encouraging are things like the PRO world is opening up now. They're starting to open up the SysNet application, which is really a distributed database of all the society's information. And they're starting to open these things up to the people that need to see it. So there's a rights holder access initiative that CSAC's in alpha beta stage at this point. That's about to open up, but the cooperation now, the fences seem to have been broken down, where everybody was very protective about their data. They're starting to realize they can share, but the question now is, what can I share for what purpose? And that's where there still needs to be more work.
Totally agree.
Yeah. It seems to me that we just need to keep working and working together. And if I can do a little blue skying per se, I can foresee some consolidation as people start working together to solve these problems.
And beyond just metadata, we've discussed various use cases around the actual music and the owners of music. We were discussing the potential untapped value of stems as an example. In where can we, what else can be exploited within the, not necessarily exploited's the wrong word, we don't like to use that word in this community, I know, but what other assets, not necessarily metadata, can be tapped and I'm going to say monetized again, I might as well say exploited, but what can be used to enrich the creative experience. We were discussing stems, and
Yeah, I think just as a whole, the fact that more credits are going to be available online with Jaxta launching soon, and they've been working really hard at gathering all of this content from the source, and then also different things, a lot of companies, the DSPs, are talking about showing more credits, so I think that's a huge step forward. So the whole getting the data in, I mean, a lot of the experiences we have is we're talking to the mix engineer and we're like, we need this, we need to know who assisted you and all that kind of stuff. And they've literally said, well, why? It's not online, so what's it matter? Like, why am I having to do all this extra work? But I think it's going to, as a whole, with everyone really coming together to show more credits and then also selling stems. So there's some companies now that are making those available. So if a content owner does want to sell their stems, that's a new revenue stream and a new way to work, but also crediting who played on the stems and who would get the royalties for that. It's a whole nother fun thing that everyone's going to get to work on.
great answer. They love it next door.
And also multi-tracks. There are different companies now that are starting to make that available. So I think there's going to continue to be more revenue streams and ways to make money off of this recorded content. It's not just going to be, the single mix that was released or the edit and things like that. People are going to try to monetize all of the content created in the studio. So.
Yeah, exciting time. So, 2 years' time, let's have this panel again and look at what else has developed.
Yeah.
Why don't we throw it out to the audience for any questions?
Is there a mic out there?
Yeah, we're pretty close, but they might not be able to hear.
Terry, can you give me an example or why, or perhaps a scenario where certain data was untrustworthy? As you were saying before, you made the comment that was the risk of where it just you can't be trusted.
We've encountered, as part of working with some of the different customers, we start asking, obviously, where are you getting your data? How do you want me to manage your data? And then you start getting somebody that blurts out, well, I've been screen scraping. I can't use that data. That's like just putting up a roadblock that's going, you're guessing? You're just sort of trying to figure this out? I can't do that. I'm going to have a bunch of major publishers screaming at me. I'm going to have a bunch of creators pretty upset and a bunch of labels upset going, where'd you get the data?
So the source of the data was not the songwriter or publisher?
It was not. It was not, and that's where the problem starts coming in, is when you start to look at the data, or when you're working with your customers, where'd you get it from? We were screen scraping. I can't do anything with that. It causes a big problem for me. It's a good indicator, but it's not something that I can work with.
Any other questions?
Just to follow up on what he was saying, because the comment here was the source of the data. What is the best practice in this, especially when a PRO, in the PRO environment, we have, literally decades and decades of data that is going back in, the index cards in a shoebox kind of world that we've hopefully left behind. Can you talk a little bit about what best practices are right now?
Typically, we rely, just because it's been around a long time, CWR files, or now most PROs all have websites. We take the information direct from the creators or the publishers. I can trust that data. I know where it's coming from. The songwriter wrote it, he's got to tell me. One of the things that I think is very encouraging in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of work around getting ISWCs assigned as soon as possible. An ISWC is simply who created the song. Got nothing to do with exploitation. Who are the songwriters? There's no publishers involved. There's no labels involved. Unfortunately, the industry makes money off the recordings. So it got fractured, and we're trying to get ourselves back to where let's start with the actual song and then let the exploitation work, as Deborah was saying. Everybody's adding on to the pieces after, but you have to start from the original song. That's where the PROs, and a lot of PROs, really depend on right from the source. They have to.
And the source meaning the songwriter?
Usually the songwriter or their publishers.
And can you talk a bit about what the process is to get an ISWC assigned?
ISWCs, till recently were all assigned based on the song registration coming in by the PRO. So the PRO would then, once they've cleaned up, they've got a clean work registration that they can actually work with, would get ISWCs for it. They didn't need it before then. Now the industry has changed drastically in the last few years that doesn't work anymore. You need to be able to tie an ISRC, all the ISRCs back to one ISWC. So it's a very big change that's happening, and people are starting to cooperate to make that happen now. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's something DDEX are also working on as well through the linking standard, which allows a party to sort of ask another party whether they've been able to establish a link between an ISRC and an ISWC, and that will hopefully continue to be adopted so that so that more parties can engage in that, and not just relying on a handful of companies to clean that up.
And Deborah, are you? I'm just going to start asking questions here. Hope that's okay. And Deborah, are you in this when you go into the studio? Are you also dealing with the composition and the publishing side of it, or are you focused mostly on the sound recording and the contributors who are performing?
So Viva is focused on the sound recording. So once that song actually turns into something being monetized and exploited and recorded.
Right. I mean, it's.
So ISNIs are more of the identifiers that would relate to the sound recording that would help our clients and help Viva in terms of properly crediting the players.
So just to connect these two dots here, it's essential that the songwriters themselves register their works with their PROs when they've written a composition, and then we need to have all of the songwriters in aggregate to be able to get an ISWC assigned in the system. And then we can start to marry up the information that you're gathering in the studio that's coming from the labels with the ISWC. What happens, I start talking about publishing and they pull my money.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because a lot of the engineers, they have no idea who wrote the song. So, I mean, that's not going to be something that they're privy to. You know, a lot of times we'll get things in and it's working titles. There's nothing official. You know, it'll be similar to the song title, but it's definitely, most of the time it's not the actual song title that was, you know, from the publisher. You know, it'll say, hey there, but the song's really hey. And that's a big difference, you know, and so that they really don't know who wrote Hey There.
Well, and it really varies by the type of music. You know,
Right.
We're here in Nashville, and in a singer-songwriter world, there's all sorts of traditions that are done here on how splits are done, and that's wildly different than how electronic music is made. That's very different than how hip-hop is made, where there may not be a composition at all until everyone's in the studio, and then the 15 or 20 people that are there made it all up.
Right.
And so, you know, that's really a core issue, because of the way music is being created now is quite a challenge just to identify who's there, and then certainly on top of that, who contributed what percentage.
It's interesting when they get nominated for Grammys how many more songwriters get tagged on. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So I think
Trying to lighten the metadata loads.
Sorry if there were any acronyms that were thrown out that weren't understood. Feel free to ask one of us or Google it. Thanks to everyone for being on this panel. Appreciate your insights, and thanks to everyone for sticking around.
And thanks to you for moderating.
Yes, thanks, Josh.
And thanks to Vicky for being the host.
Yeah, thank you,
Hostess.
Vicky.
Well done.
Yay, we survived.
I don't know.